Counsel for the defense has spoken of the two worlds that face each other. The depth of suffering and the heights of power. The world of the Caesars, he said, knows no tears. True. Tears are known only to the man who has a human heart within him, who is capable of being moved by the sufferings of his fellow men. He that has a heart of Counsel for the defense has spoken of the two worlds that face each other. The depth of suffering and the heights of power. The world of the Caesars, he said, knows no tears. True. Tears are known only to the man who has a human heart within him, who is capable of being moved by the sufferings of his fellow men. He that has a heart of stone is neither moved nor shocked, even when he is brought face to face with the horror of his hideous actions. When he is brought to judgment, he is capable of a wily struggle, compact of falsehoods and evasions. For the leader declared that a lie should be repeated so often that even others will begin to believe it. Indeed, the worlds face each other here. This is quite true. But the world of the dictator is not the height of authority, but the lowest depth of hatred. And it is the world of the victims that has brought to all men on earth the tidings that were heard on Sinai, and the supreme command, "Thou shalt not murder." Thus Israel has stood from days of yore, face to face with the men of hatred, vengeance, and arrogance. Thus stood the forefathers, and thus the children too will stand. And the Philistine said unto David, "Come to me, and I'll give thy flesh unto the foes of the air, and to the beasts of the field." Then said David to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast taunted." These are the two worlds, and this is their meeting. The saintly Dr. Gruber gave us the definition of the Nazi soldier, the Landknecht, who casts away his conscience when he puts on his uniform, who from then on remains completely indifferent to the suffering to others, who rejects every plea and is unwilling to pay the slightest heed to requests to alleviate the suffering. Adolf Eichmann was cold and unyielding even towards his fellow countrymen. Dr. Gruber saw before him when speaking to this man, as he said here, a gaping chasm of hatred. In one rare moment, when Dr. Gruber stood in front of him, tired and broken, pleading for the life of a Jew, Eichmann showed some kind of feeling. And what did he say then? Why do you bother, Dr. Gruber, with all this activity? The Jews will never be grateful. This is from where the
crime against Jews is defined already at the time. He even admitted that much on cross-examination. As from the year 1937 and onwards, at least, he was active fighting the Jewish people in the SD lines and succeeded in his emigration enterprise that he bought himself a name. He was known as an acknowledged expert until the head office of the SD did not consent to his request to be transferred to another field of activity. By the way, may it be said that Eichmann here was caught with a glaring lie. He wanted to convince you, Your Honors, that his dealing with Jewish emigration gave him satisfaction. This was the job he liked, and this he did willingly. His transfer to Berlin, according to his words, was forced upon him. He tried in vain to free himself of this job. I shall come to this chapter later. But in his personal file, there is a trace to his will to be transferred to another job at the time he was dealing with emigration. That is in May 38. This was the time, and this is also what transpires from the documents. Only then he requested a transfer to Linz, where his family lived. The SD head office was not ready to have the expert Eichmann transferred easily. The man who in 1938 already became indispensable in the front of anti-Jewish activity, as his superior 6 wrote about him. The persecution of Jews in Germany, beginning with the ascension of Hitler to the regime and headed the rule in the country until the implementation of the physical extermination, was a continuous crime against the accepted principles of human morals, or as they are called, a crime against humanity. These persecutions found expression in certain peaks. They were described before the court, and proof was brought before Your Honors. A day of bans, the Nuremberg laws, the Crystal Night, these are the milestones.
President of Court, forgive me for interrupting you, sir, but sir, you said something here about the accused requesting a transfer to Berlin. Mr. Hausner, to Berlin, and then to Linz, President of Court. But no, you said first, sir, that he wanted a transfer to Berlin and then to Linz.
That Eichmann maintains his transfer Berlin was against his will. From there, he requested a transfer to another place. I add and say, we have his personal file, and from this file it transpires that the only time where he requested a transfer in writing, except what he said here when he was being questioned in the witness box, was at the period when he was dealing with emigration, the task in which he found satisfaction.
President, of course, I see. Thank you.
The persecutions were aimed especially against the Jewish population, and therefore the law and the case in the case of Pell against the Attorney General is appropriate, and I quote. Still speaking of the early period, where the idea of physical extermination did not occur yet. After Poland was crushed in the Second World War, the enterprise took on new forms. Heydrich called the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen and other commanders on the 21st of September 1939 and informed them that the plan now was to remove all Jews from Polish territories annexed to the Reich, within Poland to uproot all Jews from their homes, to concentrate them in camps towards the last phase of the solution. Within the occupied Poland, camps will be set up where Jews would be moved from there onwards. The final solution will in the meantime be regarded as a top secret. This is the plan. Uproot all the civil Jewish population, all Jews, into the General Gouvernement, to put the Jews into ghettos, to set up councils of elders of the Jews, in charge of all and informed them that the plan now was to remove all Jews from Polish territories annexed to the Reich, within Poland to uproot all Jews from their homes, to concentrate them in camps towards the last phase of the solution. Within the occupied Poland, camps will be set up where Jews would be moved from there onward. The final solution will in the meantime be regarded as a top secret. This is the plan. Uproot all the civil Jewish population, all Jews, into the General Gouvernement, to put the Jews into ghettos, to set up councils of elders of the Jews, in charge of all concentration of Jews. He will personally be responsible for explicit performance of orders and prepare the Jews in the ghettos for the coming steps. Anyone taking part at that meeting and anyone who had a hand in the plan of implementation must have known that the horrifying words of Hitler, the implementation of these words is nearing. The words he said at the Reichstag on the 30th of January 1939. In the war to come, the Jews of Europe will be exterminated. Not in vain did the accused try so hard to put himself at a distance from participating at this meeting. Although his name and rank appear in the list of those present, when he was questioned by the police, he tried to evade, to find an excuse, to extricate himself, but at the time he did not have yet the brazenness which he revealed in court to deny the correctness of an official document and maintain that this was forged. At the police, when questioned, he said there was no doubt regarding his participation at this meeting, and this after he was shown the list of those who took part. He added that, of course, he knew about it at the time, about the whole plan. In court he argued that in the meantime he realized and learned from the documents that he was mistaken. But this argument is senseless. How does Eichmann want to explain that he never participated at this meeting? From the fact that 6 testified that Eichmann did not take part in the ordinary consultations of heads of departments, and Dr. Levenherz saw him in Berlin in December 1939. But all this is nonsense. They cannot withstand examination. First, the document speaks for itself. We know from the testimonies of Benno, Cohen, Meyer, and Lindenstraum that Eichmann dealt in the center of Berlin as from March 1939. And the witnesses were not questioned. The accused did not try to deny their words. He did not rebut their version. Thirdly, we did not gather from the accused himself, who was interested to forge the document which was found, and why the forgery. And this is the time to remark in connection with many documents submitted by the prosecution in this case. Before I do so, I beg to submit to
death. They included a woman carrying a baby of 3 years in her arms. She tried to protect him from the cold with the few garments she had, and finally both of them fell down and remained in the snow. A half-frozen child, a girl of about 5 years old, was taken out of the snow, barely alive. No one recognized her. Around her neck she had a cardboard sign mentioning her name, Renata Alexander from Hammerstein in the Pomerania district. It transpired that the child had been sent to visit relatives in Stettin and was deported with them while her parents remained behind in Germany. The frozen feet and hands of this girl had to be amputated in the Lublin hospital. The bodies were taken from the roadside by special carts. About 280 people from the Stettin deportees died. Your Honors, this is all still in the period of the beginning of 1940. The Führer had not yet ordered the physical liquidation of the Jews. But Eichmann already is shown at the beginning of his career. I have examined him about this operation. He admitted that according to the plan which was set down, he had to set up the transport timetables. It says in the document that according to the decision, Department 4D4 will carry that out, and this certainly applies to the Jews of Stettin as well. But it also says in the document that Bureau 3 also dealt with the matter. Of course, we would not want to state that only he dealt with the matter. We would not want to put it as sharply as all that. When we think about Renata Alexander, the 5-year-old girl whose hands and feet had to be amputated in hospital in Lublin, about the mother and her 3-year-old girl falling down into the snow, about the hundreds of victims of this death march from Stettin, then the dispute with Eichmann about the marking of documents and the distribution of functions and the marking of departments look as though they belong to a different world altogether. Eichmann's network of lies was also evident here. At first, in the police examination, before he knew how many documents we have about the matter, he said at first that the marking 4D4 as a marking of a department probably was a misprint. He said the matter was entirely strange to him. Fremd was the German word he used. Whereas, in truth, he was then taken into the confidence of the chiefs of the SS and the ministers of the state in connection with this matter, and was taken into the confidence of the authorities in the occupied areas, and in their presence, in that meeting, he was told about the matter, and he dealt with it for many long months, and it is simply impossible for him not to remember it. And indeed, later on, when he was shown the documents, then he spoke differently. Then he remembered. And this perhaps is an appropriate occasion to remark about his, quote, defective, unquote, memory, in which he from time to time sought refuge. Scores of times he replied in the cross-examination that he did not remember any matters which must have been engraved in his memory. That's what he also told the court in reply to questions. This included the supply of gas to concentration camps by his department, the date of the decision of the final solution, or about the supply of bones, of skulls and skeletons, about the matter of his visits to extermination camps, the dissolution of ghettos, as to whether he saw the loading of Jews onto trains, the corrections in the so-called brown file, the instructions to the Einsatzgruppen, his activities in the government general area, and scores of other crucially important matters. In all of these cases, he only shows us his skill in reconstructing documents with the help of the books by Reitlinger and Polyakov and others. But his memory he is not prepared to put at the disposal of the court, because it is deficient. So that's what he says. I believe that it is only very rarely that one meets a man gifted with such an unusual power of memory as this accused. He is capable, if he wishes, to remember details and fragmentary small events and facts which occurred many years ago. He is capable of reconstructing without the aid of documents and written statements, but from his own knowledge, small and big matters which occurred long time ago. In order to understand the amazing capacity of his memory, it is sufficient to study the first 70 pages of his statement to the police and to study the memoirs which he wrote down, Exhibit T44, in order to find out that the man is capable today, after 20-odd years, to describe the details of conversations of that time, thoughts which he had then. He's capable of giving a detailed picture about conditions of service in that period, including the period of the extermination. He can describe how the rooms and the furniture looked then, the documents, the card files, who the men were with whom he met there, what they looked like and what their character was. He's capable to remember after 23 years what his military salary was when he served in Dachau. He can remember the food which he ate then, the auxiliary services which he did for his commander Fichel. He can even remember the shape of the paper on which he wrote his letters and the reports to Fichel, that it was perforated paper which bore numbers on top. In those memoirs which he wrote down here in Israel and gave to the police, he brought minute details about personal impressions, experiences, where he would spend the weekends and days of rest. He described his studies in elementary schools, the details of how he was accepted to work for the vacuum oil company, who recommended him, what the names of the officials were, what his salary was, his business trips, and scores of other little details. He quotes the name of the book from which he studied Hebrew at the time. And he says that the name of the book was Ivrit Levad, Hebrew alone. And he remembers that the price of lentil soup 24 years ago was 35 pfennig, and a bread roll was given free, and that the price of beer was 45 pfennig a stein. He remembered whom he met on board ship when he traveled to the Orient in 1937, to the Near East, what the hotel was where he stayed, and other details which attest to an unusual power of memory. He forgot only one detail, that he has already disclosed in writing and orally, probably without knowing that this would eventually be used against him, this amazing power of his memory. And that when he tries to seek refuge in obscuring his memory with regard to decisive and crucial matters, no one can believe him anymore. And now, Your Honors, a few words about another legal problem, about the question of how Eichmann links up with the entire complex of... President of Court, Mr. Hausner, please proceed. In my latest remarks, I assumed that the accused was not free to leave his job of directing the Department for Jewish Affairs in the Gestapo. But from a factual point of view, this assumption is baseless. There did exist such a possibility if he had only asked for it. Himmler himself, when he spoke to a meeting of senior commanders in Posen, indicated that if a senior commander wanted to be transferred, he should be pensioned off because he proved that his nerves had been shattered. We also have factual proof. In the Nuremberg judgment, in case number 9, page 40 of our pamphlet, this is an exhibit in the present trial by agreement of both sides. And there we find mentioned the Noske incident. Noske's rank was equivalent to Eichmann's. He explicitly refused to carry out murderous orders against Jews. He did this openly. He was not shot, he was not demoted, he was not even tried. A certain degree of inconvenience was caused to him, and no more. Also we have Best, on account of whom the anti-Jewish operation in Denmark failed. He did not suffer either. Eichmann harbors resentment against him to this very day because of that failure, and this can be seen in what Eichmann said in the police interrogation. Furthermore, defense witness 6, what does he say? I quote, "It was possible to be relieved of jobs in commanding the Einsatzgruppen without being involved in a court-martial or being demoted, even though it was considered an act of cowardice. There was always the possibility of being released from the RSHA and of asking for transfer to the front, or else of being released for some kind of other voluntary task." That is the end of the quote. Eichmann admits that he had never submitted a written application for transfer, that he had never addressed such an application to the chief of the RSHA. He says he has asked this of Müller, his direct superior, and when Müller refused, he did not appeal against that decision. His friendship of long standing with Kaltenbrunner, the man who had brought him into the party and the SS before the Nazis had ever taken power, this friendship enabled him to make a personal recommendation outside of any service channels for the promotion of his colleague, Eichmann's colleague, Kraus. This is in document T1431. Is it conceivable that if he had grown tired of his murderous job, he could not have applied to his longtime friend and transferred? Therefore, from the factual point of view, Eichmann's claim is not truthful, is based on a lie. If his superiors had known that he had wanted to go to the front, then as 6 says they should have let him go. This is what Eichmann's own witness testified, and I go further and I say, if they had sensed that his heart was not in this vast operation, they themselves would have transferred him elsewhere. But he did not want this. And we have quotations from him, from what he told Zassen. I have never asked for a transfer elsewhere. Of course, when I showed him the reprint here, it was in session number 95, he denied having ever said these things. And we have the words of his beloved, who says that Eichmann was obsessed with a desire to exterminate Jews. And her spoke about Eichmann's psychological attitude towards this, and I shall discuss this later on. From the legal point of view, this does not add or detract to the guilt of the accused, because the assumption is that even compulsion and duress do not exonerate a person from responsibility. One must not murder even when one's own life is in danger. This is how it is according to Israel law, because duress does not exist in a matter of bloodshed. It is the same way according to our regular criminal law, paragraph 17 of the Criminal Law Ordinance 1936.
As Eichmann gave him encouragement and satisfaction to continue his heinous job and helped him overcome his own doubts. The two were close friends. Eichmann admitted this much in court. He added and admitted while cross-examining that Hess was accurate and very particular. He had no reason to lie, to diminish the responsibility of others and shift it onto Eichmann. With less pleasure, because this was said to a Jewish interrogator. Eichmann said, when questioned by Superintendent Less, and in connection with Bislett said his words, who accused Eichmann personally in a decisive part of this catastrophe which came upon the Jews in Europe. This is what he said. I quote from T37, page 2525. I belong to the kind of people, as I have already said, who in 1945 did not say or do not say today, I was always against it, and who try by this cheap excuse to extort themselves from the choking ring. This will not be correct. I did not have such thoughts, and this is not becoming. I cannot say today in my own justification that I was always against this. We therefore have it from Eichmann himself. While he was questioned in Israel, a statement and admission that he did not object in his very soul to the fulfilling of his job, and Zassen added that he did all these atrocities with joy. But even without these admissions, and even if we did not have so much evidence of his attitude and approach, fanatical as it was, of Eichmann to the implementation of the plan, if all we had known was that he was appointed to a certain job after Heydrich in September 39 prepared the Jews in the Reich for the slaughter, and Heydrich knew exactly what will be the job of the head of this department, we must say that Heydrich chose the man for the job. And this we must bear in mind. The plan of the division of functions in the RSHA, he was the only man to head a department which dealt with all Jewish matters. You will seek in vain in departments of Heydrich and Kaltenbrunner a similar department. There was no other department to deal with Judenangelegenheiten, matters concerning Jews. And what did they do in the Third Reich and onwards when they dealt with Jews? What were Judenangelegenheiten? What were Jewish affairs? We know. The extermination of the Jews was their business, the annihilation of a people. So I maintain and claim that had we known only that this was the Gestapo man for Jewish matters and problems, and had he no further proof for his part in this crime, and even then there is a weighty presumption that he was in the center of this treason. But we know more about the man, much more. We know, for instance, that he stayed on fulfilling his task in the center, the nervous center of this final solution for whole 5 years. He was not transferred. He was not relieved. And this was an enterprise full of struggle, initiative, and tactics, which demanded hardness? Is it not clear that his superiors saw in him the right man in the right place for the implementation of this plan? Is it not clear that had he voiced a doubt in connection with the task assigned to him, he would have been relieved immediately and replaced by another? And exploiting the technological means which Nazi Germany put at the disposal of Eichmann, this was...
The purpose was to exterminate millions, to bring into operation vast apparatuses, to obtain means and instruments and all of this under the conditions of total war and employing the need and upon the need of employing ruses and means to implement this task. But there is also much evidence that he acted fanatically and tirelessly to attain this objective. His objective was the total annihilation of the Jews. He believed that by striking at European Jewry, he would wound world Jewry fatal wounds, as he told Wislizeni. And I quote, "The source of the biological strength of the Jewish nation was in Polish Jewry. This Jewry was exterminated to the last man. World Jewry will never recover from this blow." This is what Eichmann said in the summer of 1904. This is a description from the accused himself of the conspiracy of the plotters and conspirators. Finally, a few remarks. Your Honors will recall the lengthy examination about the document in the margin of which we found in Rademacher's handwriting concerning the Serbian Jews. Eichmann proposes to shoot them to death. The accused maintains that this is forgery, that Rademacher had noted this later to cover up some sort of unauthorized action taken by himself. If we try to believe him for one moment, then it was enough to Eichmann in the documents of the German Foreign Ministry in order to have sufficient cover for the murder of Jews, a sufficient explanation which would satisfy everyone concerned. This excuse itself is to the detriment of the accused no less than the truth itself. Because if we believe him and not Rademacher, then we must also believe that his status was so exalted, so unshakable, and his decision so final that Rademacher could have employed merely a reference of his name in order to cover up some kind of unauthorized act of his own and have it silenced forever. Our version is quite different. We want to believe that Eichmann did give the suggestion which was noted down by Rademacher. And as Rademacher later testified, later on Rademacher and Zur went out and the bloodbath occurred. We have therefore before us the chief executive officer of the extermination. Of course, he has a chief of staff and a minister above him and the head of state above everything, and he is subject to their instructions and their general directives. The signal to open an operation comes from above, But once this signal is given, this man undertook the execution and never ceased, this angel of destruction. Eichmann's status and his authority as chief executive officer in this enterprise and his authority to give binding instruction are explained in another passage from the Zasen documents which I should like to hear, which I should like to read, and which was in fact read here in court. This passage said that he had the right to give instructions to all Gestapo officers, to the advisors on Jewish affairs in the foreign countries, that is to say, to all those people who were concerned with the final solution of the Jewish problem in the roundups and the deportations. And then in cross-examination, when he says that he had only authority to give instructions and not orders, because the Gestapo people were officials and not soldiers, and officials receive instructions while soldiers get orders. Let it be this way. I accept this distinction by Eichmann. He only instructed the Gestapo officials. But his instructions were binding on the entire mighty apparatus to perform the work which he directed and managed, and the practical implementation of which he had planned down to the last detail, the work of deporting people to their death. In this segment of the Zasen document, and in the other passages which I submitted and which bear the accused's corrections, these were not disputed by the accused. He admitted that the gist of these statements were correct. Perhaps he did not exactly put it this way. He says these may not be the very words, but the contents is exact. This is what he said about this passage and about others. Therefore, the contents of those passages which he
report about the Sobibor extermination camp, it says that this is on the track between Chelm, Voldava and Brest. He who ordered to send Jews towards home or towards Auschwitz signed their death sentence.
Warrant. The wave of documents testifies to the hand that was directing these things, to the man who held sway over these matters. Not only that he speaks in the first person in all these documents, but there is no trace of it there, that this I of these documents should apply to anybody else. He speaks about his own office in Paris, in The Hague, in Oslo, my office, my department. This is what he says then about his mission. In Zasen documents, in this particular part which had been admitted in evidence, we heard how he would control Richter in Romania, and we know what Richter was doing in order to deal with Romanian Jews, even if he had to sidetrack and hoodwink what the Ministry of Interior of Romania had decided. And he wouldn't do it before getting a relevant consent, relevant authorization from Eichmann. Incidentally, also this passage dealing with Richter had been confessed and approved by Eichmann in cross-examination. he admitted that this was the case. And when I heard what had he to do with male problems in Esterburg camp in Holland, he said that he had to do it because this was a Jewish matter. And after all sorts of subterfuges in cross-examination, he said that any isolated matter dealing with Jews and reaching Gestapo was certainly within the realm of jurisdiction of his department. This is on page 99. This department had been declared by all persons concerned as the central office for the solution of the Jewish problem. This is what Dannecker said in a letter in which he refers to Eichmann as Commissar of Jewish Problems in Europe. And here again we see how mighty the department of Eichmann was. The authority to negotiate with Pierre Laval, the then Prime Minister of France. It was Eichmann who had authority to deal with Pierre Laval so far as deportations were concerned. He was the one who was to threaten France and say that if certain things are not going to be complied with, the authority to negotiate with Pierre Laval, the then Prime Minister of France. It was Eichmann who had authority to deal with Pierre Laval so far as deportations were concerned. He was the one who was to threaten France and say that if certain things are not going to be complied with, this is what he said to Redke, France is going to be taken out of the orbit of countries deporting Jews. After all, Redke was a frequent visitor to Gestapo headquarters, but nevertheless he was afraid of doing what had been ordered. He was seeking to subterfuges in order to extricate himself from this responsibility, and therefore Eichmann was threatening him, and according to Redke, Eichmann was in a position to implement his threats. And these notes, we get an additional support to reports that have been received, and we see clearly what his position was, and we see quite clearly that Goering's words were true, that Eichmann was the one to earmark people for deportations and to decide on all matters pertaining to deportation. And we heard from Eichmann in Zarsen documents in which he said how one had to struggle against stumbling blocks and difficulties, how the Jews were pushed out of Western countries and what were the obstacles they ran up against in implementing this task. In his police statement, Eichmann said that his emissaries in all the countries of deportations were to set up the legal basis for deportation. This was the first task devolving upon them. This is what Redke said to Laval. And then in the East, Richter was negotiating with Antonescu, and Dannecker was negotiating with Bulgarian government. All this on a legal basis. And Vysotseny was negotiating with the Slovakian government. In Hungary, this task was entrusted to Eichmann himself. How great his influence was in all these matters is proved by the fact that the German Foreign Ministry has to apologize to him that in an urgent matter in Vichy France it acted without having consulted him previously, because at that time he was on a service trip. When he was asked by his counsel, he said that this was not customary at all to adopt this procedure. And when he was interrogated at cross-examination, he said that it was the procedure to apologize to him, because after all they had to inform him about these activities. This is what he said himself. And also the appointment of Deputy de Clam as the General Commissioner of Jewish Matters in Vichy France. This was also within the realm of his competence, and he recommended him. And this is how we see the network of direct activities, of this most efficient support lent by Eichmann everywhere for the implementation of the task of this particular department.
President of Court, did you manage to get through more the material than you believed you would today?
This is another chapter.
President of Court, I believe we shall be able to follow the plan. Attorney General, yes, as I said this morning. President of Court, so we shall adjourn now. The coming session tomorrow at 8:30.